Okay, so welcome to everyone who's joining us here today. I want to welcome everyone to our third and our last presentation in our Urban Agriculture Pest Management webinar series. This webinar series is coordinated by the Great Lakes Urban Agriculture IPM Working Group. And their work, our work, is supported by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture, specifically the Crop Protection and Pest Management Program. And that's through the North Central IPM Center. And of course, we thank them for their support. Okay, so if you have just recently joined, I just wanted to let you know, as we get started here, we ask for you to make sure that your camera is off. So if you do accidentally turn it on, we're going to force stop it, just so that we can kind of keep that appearance of a webinar for our viewers after the fact. So we'll be helping you turn off those videos. And of course, please stay muted. I think I've actually put on a setting so that you are unable to unmute yourself, okay? So we can kind of cut down on that background noise throughout the presentation. If you do have any technical problems or have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the chat box. Myself and Laura will be monitoring that chat box so that if there's any clarifying questions that come through, we'll make sure to unmute ourselves and ask that on behalf of you, okay? So let's get started here. I want to introduce today's speaker, and we want to welcome Dr. Erin Hill to talk about plant ID apps, especially for weed identification. Dr. Erin loves the plants that everyone seems to hate. She serves as the weed science diagnostician for Michigan State University Plant and Pest Diagnostics, with the responsibilities in plant identification, assisting with abiotic plant injury and herbicide resistance screening. Erin also serves as the instructor for 2 weed science courses. She's a native Michigander and holds degrees in plant science and at both MSU and University of Michigan. So you can tell me how that works for you, Dr. Erin. But with that, I'll hand it right over to you. Go ahead and launch your presentation, and
All right, will do. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Yeah, how does that work, having a degree from the University of Michigan and then going to Michigan State? I don't know. I still root for Michigan when it comes to football, but I've been at Michigan State for over 20 years now, so it works out okay. As was said, I work here in our diagnostic clinic. If you are familiar with your local diagnostic clinic, probably your diagnostician is here at MSU this week because we are having the regional annual meeting here yesterday and today. So lots of fun going on here at Michigan State University. Our lab is quite special because we have 6 full-time people working in diagnostics. And as far as I know, we're the only diagnostic lab in the country that has somebody with a weed science background. So that I hope they think is nice and adds something to our diagnostic capabilities. This time of year, I'm really focused on herbicide resistance screening for our large scale growers who are wanting to see if they actually have resistance. One thing, though, that I do get asked to talk about quite a bit is plant ID, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. In the lab class that I teach, we spend 6 weeks talking about weed identification. And so it's kind of a natural fit to talk to groups such as this about that. When I first got asked to teach the lab, that was 7 years ago, when we were coming up with a curriculum, one of the things that they mentioned was, well, Erin, you should include something about using these plant ID apps. So this was in 2018. And I don't know, I guess I have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. And I was like, using an app for plant ID, like, well, I can't be replaced by a smartphone app, you know? So I was very skeptical about how well they worked. But I saw, we have to keep up with technology. We have to teach the students about the pros and cons of technology. So I was like, okay, we'll do this, but we're not going to just talk about it. We're going to put the apps to the test. And so that kind of leads us into where we are with this, and kind of you'll see the motivation for that. Um, so backing up a little bit though, before we had these kind of miracles in our hand, these smartphones, the ID tools that we had were a little bit different, right? We were using keys that are either in books or within the past decade and a half on websites. Um, and that's okay, but plant keys can be a little bit cumbersome and a little bit off-putting. So probably many of you are familiar with what a plant key looks like, but a dichotomous key is one that gives you two choices based on what the plant looks like, right? The morphological features of the plant. This is an example from one of the books we use a lot called Weeds of the Northeast in the beginning. And you can see here that the first question it asks are leaves are simple or leaves are compound. But in this particular book, there's no picture to remind you what that means. And the features that they talk about only get more complex after that. And most people haven't had a botany class anymore where they actually learn about these structures. I never had that. Um, and so it's really off-putting, right? Like ochrea, what is an ochrea? If you don't know and you have to go to another resource to look it up, it's just a source of frustration, and you want to give up, right? So that's kind of where we were. These keys are still really valuable. I'll talk about a case later when that's the case. But even when I'm using them, I have to sit down with the key and then a botanic dictionary to try and figure out what's going on. Um, this is again some features that are really common, and we'll talk about this later with some grass photos. For grasses in particular, those are very difficult. A lot of the keys involve the flowers, which we don't always have. And then some of them involve these other structures like the ligule or the presence or absence of oracles. Um, Things that the average client contacting me in the diagnostic clinic is not going to know. The students don't necessarily know when they're starting out. I hope they know it after 6 weeks of talking about it, but at the beginning, for sure, they don't necessarily know that. This is an example of a grass-specific key that's in the back of the Weeds of the Northeast book. This one is a little bit easier for people to follow because it's sort of a flow chart, a little bit less jargon in it, but still kind of a challenge. Um, then there is the availability of keys online, and I'm going to try to pull up one to see if I can show you what that looks like. This is here. This is from the University of Missouri, and the nice thing about these online keys is that they can provide you with some kind of pictures. It's pulling, in this case, this is for weeds. It's pulling from 461 records that they have in Missouri, and you can go through and click what your plant looks like, and it will remind you if you don't remember what opposite and alternate leaves are. And as you go through and pick, it starts to really truncate that list of options, and then you can click on these to get more information. So the online keys can be helpful. Again, it's a little time consuming, and you notice that the two keys that I had on the slide are for Missouri and California. There isn't one for every state, and that can be problematic for maybe a few species. So yep, there's that screenshot of that. The other thing we talk about is the option to use the internet to just do a search in the search bar, and you can describe your plant there and your Google search or whatever search engine that you like to use. And when I talk about this with master gardeners and other groups, I talk about the utility of Boolean operators to really strengthen your search. These are things like using the tilde or that little squiggly line to search for synonyms of how you're describing the plant. So maybe you're describing the plant as being hairy, but a more botanical term would be pubescent. If you put the tilde and you put hairy, it's going to search for all synonyms of that particular word. Um, My other favorite one to use when I'm doing internet searches, and this isn't just for plant ID, it's for any kind of search, is the minus sign, which can filter things out of your search. So, as you might imagine, as a weed scientist, looking up things about weeds, sometimes my searches turn up things about cannabis, and that's not what I'm searching for. So, I can put the minus sign with cannabis and it will filter out all of that stuff. So, I don't have to waste my time going through pages of things that are not relevant. So, these things can be helpful. Um, an example here, I think I have one or two examples, is looking for purple dead nettle. You could describe that with the location here in Michigan, springweed, and put purple leaves in quotes. So it only brings back images that describe purple leaves. And then you get all of these images that come up, and then you can kind of go through and see if one of those matches the plant that you had in mind. In this case, that has happened. And so then you can follow up with those links to see what the name of the plant is. Another one here, thinking about one of my favorite ag weeds is velvet leaf. I'm going to describe it as with that tilde heart shaped, because another word for that could be cordate. Pubescent leaf, yellow flower, location Michigan. And so here we see that it did bring up velvet leaf, the plant that I had in mind, but it brought up a lot of other things too. So a couple of these are violets. If I wanted to get those out of the search, I could have added minus violet. Um, but when I'm talking to people about using this even as an option, you can find some misleading information out here. If you look at the bottom under the picture, it's going to give you the source web page that it's coming from. And the first one is actually an MSU website in our college, but the second one is coming from Reddit. So that's not necessarily a very reliable source of information. So you'd want to, double check anything you found out this way with a more reliable source. The reliable sources that I recommend for Michigan are to see if we have this particular plant in Michigan Flora, which shows all of our herbarium specimens in Michigan that are logged in on a map, or using the USDA plant database. And I believe I have some shots of those. Here we have the Michigan flora, what that looks like. It's very nice. I'm not certain if, I know there are people from other states here, if they have a database like this. But it's pretty nice. You can put in I always recommend to put in the scientific name, because this one is very particular about the common name. So when I spell purple dead nettle, I spell dead nettle as one word. Michigan flora has a hyphen, and if I spell it my way, it'll say that we don't have it in Michigan. So this makes the case for students to use the Latin binomial, the genus, and the species when they're doing their searches. It's going to give them the best information. Um, so this pulls up a map. Again, this is only when herbarium specimens have been submitted. And so, I'll get people who are from other counties here. They're like, well, I'm from Genesee County and I know that we have purple dead nettle. How come there's no spot on the map? That's because nobody has pulled a sample, dried it, pressed it, and submitted it to an herbarium. So it's not a perfect map. But it will give you an idea that yes, we do have this plant in Michigan, and here's at least an idea of the distribution. So all of these things, they're still available, they still work, but they require some background in plant morphology. And, sometimes we don't have the time or bandwidth to deal with that. So the idea of having this smartphone app for Plant ID is really attractive. So I mentioned that we've been testing these in our lab since 2018, and these are some of the examples of the apps that we've tested over time. We don't test each of these every year, but each of these have been in there at least once. And the rationale behind the apps that we had chosen up until this year were that they were available for both iPhone users and Android users, because I can't be discriminating against half of the students in my class or half the clients in our lab. So to test them, uh, the idea early on was like, all right, I'm going to go out and find plants that I know what they are, and I'm going to take a picture of them in the app, and I'm going to decide if it is correct or not correct. And very quickly, I discovered that there should kind of be this gray area or this middle ground where it's deemed partially correct. And that was the case if it's an app that gives you multiple answers and the correct answer was on the list but not at the top of the list. Or I also gave that designation if it came back as the correct genus, but it did not have the right species. So let's say for foxtail species, I had yellow foxtail, and it's telling me that it is green foxtail. Those are both Ceteria species, or Ceteria in the genus Ceteria, but different species. So it's still leading me to the right answer, but it's not 100% correct. So that's when we get this kind of gray area, this plus minus symbol. And then I repeat that and record for accuracy over different types of plants, and then over usually a minimum of 6 different apps. So I was not taking professional pictures because I don't think the average app user is going to take the time to do that. They just want an instant answer. And so these particular pictures are from 2020 when we were all stuck at home for COVID. And these are from my neighbor's yard who has a lot of weeds and doesn't mind me taking pictures of them. Everything in the name of education. So maybe you know what these plants are, but the point is I'm looking at this plant here and I'm looking at this plant in the center here. Now, when I say I'm not taking professional pictures, I'm not even pulling necessarily the other species, right? There's at least 5 species in this picture. I'm focused on the one in the center. But I wanted to see, could it do that or not? So when I have a live audience, I'll usually ask them, "Hey, what do you know what these species are?" But I'm gonna, give you a pass on that and tell you that this is one of the goldenrod species, and then we have yellow wood sorrel over here. Just 2 more examples of pictures. Again, this one here, this plant has been mowed, so it's not even in great condition. It's in a lawn on the edge, and you can see there's again probably 4 or 5 other species in this picture. Same thing with this very big leafed plant down here. So here we have bull thistle and common burdock. So these are the types of pictures I'm taking. I'm not necessarily using a contrasting background. Um, and then this is what I generated during the early years of doing this test. And during the early years, I was just doing this by myself um, and then sharing it with the students. The species that I picked over here, I'll go over this a little more detailed later, but I was trying to hit different categories of plants. So I'm always going for some kind of an ornamental plant to start. I figure that's sort of the low hanging fruit and maybe what these apps were designed for in the first place, the curious gardener, the person who's moved and doesn't know what's growing in their yard. And then because I'm teaching weed science, I moved into weeds and I would look at flowering species or flowering specimens and not flowering specimens of both broadleaves and grasses. And then at the end, I was trying to also test it with seedlings, which this time of year when we're doing this in the fall is usually winter annuals. And the motivation for the seedlings is that the students I'm training in class many of them are going to be crop scouts, or if they're trying to manage these plants they want to identify, they need to do that when they're seedlings, or else, the competition is done, the yield is lost, or it's producing seed already. So I was trying to like put it to the test with the tiniest plants to see how well it would work. So then when we put these all side by side, this is really just a qualitative assessment of the apps, just 12 species that we're looking at, in this case, 6 apps. So you kind of just look down the columns and see, okay, picture this had the most green boxes with the plus sign, meaning it was right most frequently with this sample set. So after COVID and we were back in person, I had more time to think about it, and I really wanted the students to be more involved in this assessment. And so I was able to do that utilizing Beal Botanic Garden, which is a garden we have on campus. And in the garden, all the specimens they have are labeled like this one of squill with a label in the front and then the plant in the back. And it includes not only the common name, but maybe more importantly, the scientific name. And then it gives a little information about it. So the idea about using Beal was that the students wouldn't have to already know the plants. They could depend on the sign to be confirming that the app is getting it correct or not. The other thing that's really nice about Beal Botanic Garden, if you've never been here, I really recommend you stop there. It's a very special place on our campus. But they have a whole section that is dedicated to weeds. So they have a weed garden. And so it made a lot of sense for us to be able to test this for the weed science class in the garden. So now instead of me testing it by myself and looking at 12 specimens, I can have 16 or more groups that are testing these apps. This year, I believe I have 4 sections of the class. I think I had 22 groups that were testing it. So a lot more participation, a lot more data points. I'm showing the 2023 data. I'm still working on the 2024 data from last fall. But each of the apps were evaluated 150 to 170 times. And these are the particular apps that we looked at that year: Google Lens, Picture This, Plantin, PlantNet, Plant Story, and iNaturalist. After I get all their data, after the semester's over and I start working with it, now that I have so many data points, I can actually generate percentages of the time that the apps are correct. So this is looking at the overall evaluation, so all of the species for each app. And I can categorize it here with this first green bar is showing how often it was correct, then those partially correct answers with the gray bar, and then when it was completely incorrect with the blue bar. So when you're looking at this again, you're seeing that even when we're collecting more data, Picture This is turning out to be correct more than 70% of the time. And if you add the amount of cases where it was leading you in the right direction, but not 100% correct, it's up over 80% of the time that it could be useful. So that's been kind of our front runner since the beginning. Each year we switch in new apps or recycle ones that have been in there because they are improving over time. The other nice thing about having all this data is now I can go in and look at the specific groups of weeds that we were targeting. So when I give them the sheet to fill out, they have to find a vegetative grass. So now I can go and look at all the vegetative grass data to see which areas are their strengths and weaknesses. Vegetative grasses are really hard to identify for a person. I think even those of us who have done it quite frequently, because again, the keys are made out for flowers. And you really have to get up in the grasses business by pulling it apart to look at the ligule and all of the structures. So the apps do not fare as well when it comes to vegetative grasses. Picture This was still correct with those specimens from the garden over 50% of the time, but you see a lot of the other apps are dropping off to 30% or less of the time that they were correct with vegetative grass. This is looking at just Picture This, all of those categories to show you in one slide the strengths and weaknesses of that particular app. Again, I mentioned the vegetative grasses. Seedling amaranth species are very important for people who are scouting field crops and vegetables because of the resistance issues. And the resistance issues are really uh, most detrimental in particular species and not others. So if they're going to be influencing treatment plans for these fields, they really need to be able to tell apart the species. And it is a challenging skill. And we can see here that the Picture This also had a challenge with those seedling amaranth species. And then surprisingly, it didn't do very well with evergreen trees and shrubs. That's a category I added on only the last couple years after talking to the Arboriculture Society. They were curious about how they worked with trees and shrubs. So Picture This had less than 60% accuracy in those particular categories. And those are times that you probably want to question the results that it gives you more than these other ones that it seems to do very well. This is my slide about Picture This. They're always changing what the screen looks like when you log in with your phone. I am not getting paid by Picture This or any of these app companies to do this assessment or to write this article. I'm just giving our like honest citizen science kind of feedback that we're getting. But if you are interested in trying out Picture This, there is a way to try it out for free. But you do have to be kind of savvy about that because they make it a little bit tricky. If you want to buy it, like you're going to use it a lot, many times a year. It's $30 for the annual subscription to Picture This. Um, but if you want to just try it out or you're not going to be using it that often, you can often look for a way to opt out of that paid version by looking for a grayed out cancel. Sometimes it's an X. Sometimes it's like a continue with free version or something at the bottom that is grayed out. That's what you want to look for. Occasionally in an Android phone, we've seen that those things don't appear. In that case, usually you can restart the app and you will be able to get to the free version. Um, so that's what you can do. If for some reason you're trying it out and you accidentally push the continue button or you accidentally push the purchase button, it should take you to one more screen before you've actually purchased it. So it should take you to the Google Store or the Apple Store to authorize that purchase. So you should still be able to back out if you accidentally hit the wrong button. Some people tell me though they use it so much they're like, that's the cost of doing business, and I'm going to spend the $30. So really up to your personal preference. So what do we do with the 30% or more of the time that the apps are wrong, or in particular picture this is wrong? Um, I think we have to rely a little bit on our experience that we've been developing over time. If this is a plant that you have seen before and you're like, oh yeah, that's back there in the cobwebs of my mind, I knew that, then you can probably trust what it says, right? It's kind of just refreshing your mind. But if this is a plant that is new to you, it's always good to double check that it occurs in Michigan, I have on the slide, or your state as it applies. And again, I'm recommending for Michigan that we use these two resources. If you don't have a resource for your particular state, you can also just use the USDA plants database. This is what that looks like when you pull it up. Again, I used purple dead nettle as the example. Again, I would really recommend that from the app, you use the genus and species to look it up and not the common name, because there's just a lot of regional differences in what we call particular plants. So I think that's a good red flag. Like, okay, it's telling me that it's bamboo or something like that, and I've never heard of that before. I don't think I've seen that here before. That's when you should go in and do a little more homework to make sure that it's right. The other option too is that people can send pictures to us in the diagnostic lab. That's what we're here for. The nice thing is though that these apps and the article that I've published about these apps have kind of cut down on the number of requests that we get, which was another motivation for writing this as an article with the class data. So in a little bit, I will put in the chat the link to that article. I try to update it every year, usually around this time of year before things start to green up. Um, because I know that a lot of you are answering questions for others, I would like to mention that you do not have to use the app at the time you're with the plants. So you can take a picture on your phone, and if you don't have internet, you can always use the app later and then go to your gallery and pull that picture in. The other ways it's been useful to me and my colleague in the lab who identifies plants with me is if somebody emails you a picture, you could save it to your phone, but you could also just take a picture of your monitor with the app. And that seems to work really well. So a picture of a picture. And then this one might not apply as much to this group, but my students do a pressed and dried weed collection, and sometimes they will not have identified it correctly. And I know that it's not correct, but I don't always know exactly what it is in a timely fashion. And so I've actually had success using the apps with dried specimens too. So I think it's pretty versatile. and you can use it in a lot of creative ways, and it could help make your life easier. Uh, the plant ID apps are a great starting point. They do save myself included a lot of time. Picture this is getting better because had all this data since 2021. Could say just from 2021 to 23, we had an increase of over 5% in the overall accuracy. The vegetative grasses really did jump up about 10%. And then winter annual seedlings, it's gotten better at that too. So it's not a static product. Um, and it seems to keep improving. As technologies improve and as our cameras continue to improve on our phones. One thing I'm hoping that they or some other app will roll out in the future is the option to take multiple pictures. Because let's say you have annual bluegrass here in this picture. It'd be nice to submit a picture like this, but it'd also be nice to try to zoom in on the collar region, or maybe it'd be nice to try and show it in the landscape, because I think those things could add to the ease of ID. So hopefully that'll come in the future. Examples I want to share with you when the apps are not helpful that I've found. This is one specimen that came in to the diagnostic lab for ID, and they wanted to know, this is from a golf course, they wanted to know what this swamp grass is. Um, the specimen is really tiny and not helpful, and it's actually not a grass at all. That's all that I could tell at this point, and so the app is not going to be helpful for something like this. In order to identify this plant, we ended up having to grow it in the greenhouse. So I replanted it in the greenhouse and let it grow to the point of flowers. And this is a case where we had to go through and use the key um, for the sedge, or for the jointed rush that it was. It ended up being worth my time and very helpful, because there were some management recommendations I could make from the Purdue University turfgrass weed control guide, but an app is not going to help ID something like this necessarily. The other example, and I like to share this especially with a crowd like you, is the app is not going to help when I get emailed a picture like this and it says, "What's that weed?" And when I had this email question, I said, "What's that weed?" There's like 4 or 5 weeds in here, right? Like there's purslane speedwell, and there's probably some annual bluegrass, and there's some common chickweed. And so I wrote back to this person and I said, "Well, I don't know what plant you're talking about, but these are the weeds that I see in the picture." And then they wrote back to me and they said, "No, I want to know what this weed is here, this sort of teal colored thing." And I think that uh, maybe you have guessed that I believe it's a piece of landscape twine. And so, yeah, the app's not going to help when you get something kind of odd like that. I wrote back very nicely to the person. I said, "Well, I think if you pull it up and you'll see there's no roots attached, and I think it's some nylon twine." And they were very embarrassed. But anyway, uh, apps aren't going to help you in that case either. Last, I just have a couple more minutes. I wanted to share another article that I will put in the chat for you in a minute. Is if you are in the habit of getting sent images to identify. Last year, I wrote an article about photography tips for grass ID, and this is really out of frustration for the poor quality of photos that I would get sent. Sometimes of a lawn with some kind of weedy grass in it, and they would be 5 feet away or 10 feet away from the grass, and they'd say, "Hey, what is that grass?" And I think the average person just doesn't know what you need to look at for grass ID. And so I put together some pictures to hopefully help. And I might consider doing this down the road. This one is targeting grasses. I think I have a couple slides about other plants in here, but we might do this for some other plant types or for diagnostics as well. So this is the idea of me sharing this with you, is that if this is helpful to you, you could send this article to them and say, "These are the kinds of pictures that I need." And so what we're looking at here is a lot of times things are not in focus when they get sent, the small structures. And so I like to say this is one time when it's really good to actually put your hand in the picture, because it can help your camera on your phone focus. And also the importance of using a contrasting background. This is the same stem of Bermuda grass and you see if I have it held up over the turf. You can't really see a whole lot, but if you use a contrasting background, that's very helpful. And it doesn't have to be like that's our black photo drop in the diagnostic lab, but it doesn't have to be something so formal. It just has to be a different color. So the sky works really well. Your pant leg works pretty well. The bed or the hood of a truck works very well. A lot of options for that. For grass ID in particular, showing roots is very helpful. So reminding people of that because we are looking for rhizomes to see if that can really help with identifying some of our grass species. Also for grasses, I mentioned the collar region earlier. So this article outlines like what a good picture of a collar would be. Again, you can see in most of these we're using a contrasting background. And I also just took that opportunity to sort of lay out the different types of ligules that we're looking for in that. Um, any other special features that are available on a grass like hairs on the leaves, or if there is a seed head present, also really strengthen our ability to identify grasses from photos. And then this is not in the grass article, but I try to remind people that for trees, not only do we want to see, a little section of the branch, but seeing the whole tree is helpful too, and helpful for diagnostics too, not necessarily just ID. So that's why I said I think I started with a grass article. I think it has been well received and very helpful. The clients actually do send back better pictures for me. And so now I'm kind of motivated to expand that into a different article, maybe for diagnostics. The other thing that the article covers is how to share photos. And you probably have experienced this problem as well, especially if people are sending their photos from an iPhone. But for both ID and for diagnostics, using high resolution photos is the most useful. And I use this picture of a field as an example because when you want to zoom in on a detail, if they send you the low resolution version, you can't make out anything. It's very pixelated. But if they send you the high resolution, obviously you can zoom in on it. I have a specific screenshot for iPhone users because I think the Android users don't get an option of how to send the picture. But on the iPhone, it will give you a choice. And so people want to use less space or whatever. They pick the small one when really the actual size is the most beneficial. So I actually included that screenshot just to help because my biggest problem seemed to be iPhone users sending me these little thumbnails that I can't do anything with. And then this is another shot. This one is more Android specific, but you can also adjust the resolution on your phone. And for that, I just recommend that people look up their phone because there's too many different phones to really address this properly. But you can often set the resolution higher than it may be. When people want to share a lot of photos, not usually the case for ID, but for diagnostics, sometimes we have extension educators who want to send us 30 or 40 pictures, and they've all been really good about this. So maybe you all are already really good about this. But the ones who create a Google Drive folder or use Google Photos and just send us the link or use something like Dropbox or Apple Share or SharePoint and just send that link, that's the best way to be able to share many, many pictures. So I appreciate our extension's efforts in doing that. That is all that I really had planned to cover today for this particular talk. And I know that we had maybe Laura was going to give some insights into the insect ID apps because that's not something that I have worked on. I've tried to encourage my people who teach insect ID here that they should include it, but I haven't heard any data on that yet.
Yeah, no, first, thank you so much. Just to drive it home, right? This weed ID is so important because it can dictate what are the good management strategies, right? Like
Yes,
if you have Canadian thistle, there's some things you want to do and there's some things you absolutely don't want to do. So
right.
if you want to actually solve your weed issue, this is why it's so important. And also other fun reasons, right? Is it a native plant? Like, is it
Yeah,
something you want to keep instead of remove? Or is it edible? So lots of
yeah.
reasons to
And
ID.
And Picture This actually does give you quite a bit of information if you scroll down after the ID. I haven't really spent any time validating that information, but I know they include a map that shows the distribution. Again, I don't know if where they're pulling that map from. So if it's something new to you, you still might want to do some extra digging. But I think they do have some anecdotes about it being edible, or sometimes I'll take a picture of weed and it tells me it's not healthy. Um, and I'm like, good, I don't want it to be healthy. But I personally haven't spent any time validating that extra information, but I know that it is there. And some people do find it informational or entertaining, I guess. So
Great. All right, cool. I will hand it over to Laura so she can, yeah, give a little bit about some of her favorite insect ID apps.
Well, first, Erin, that is amazing that you have all of that information evaluating these apps. I feel like we should all follow your model and do this for all of them.
yeah, it's not hard. I mean, it wasn't like I had some genius idea. It was just like I didn't believe they were good, so I wanted to test them. And I
Yeah,
mean, they're way better. I mean, I will admit, like I was not a believer in 2018, and now during the growing season, I use the app multiple times a week, so it's very helpful.
that's very cool. So I don't have nearly the level of detail and no data, but I can just talk about personal experience. I've been curious and I've been using apps a little more often, or the Google Lens to try for identification. Most of what I've done is with beetle specimens and caterpillar specimens. So, there's so many different types of insects out there. Some of them I have never tried to do the app with, but typically my go-to is Seek or iNaturalist. And I honestly don't know a lot of others that are out there. I've downloaded a few and then I have issues with them working and get frustrated and get rid of it. So Seek or iNaturalist are pretty good and pretty reliable. And what I like about them is they tell you, according to their match, geographically, how close to you that organism has been identified. So if you're way off. If there's like absolutely no record anywhere near where you are, then it's likely, a really bad match. But the other thing that I do find very helpful is Google Lens a little bit, but more so just a really basic Google search where you describe, like in the search, describe what it looks like. Black caterpillar with yellow stripes, Indiana, or if you can say what plant it's on even, and that will get you close. And one of the best resources in terms of what comes up as possible matches, using Bug Guide or Bugwood, but Bug Guide is usually very much at the top of the list for explanations, and that is very heavily contributed to by scientists, and has a lot of information, a lot of different pictures submitted so you can compare to what you're looking at, and a lot of information about biology, the taxonomy, but that just can get you close, maybe if you're in like the right family, but not quite the right species. So that's what I would say. And it's a bit tricky. Like Erin said, with different species or species groups, there are different structures that are important for identification. For some of those organisms, you're not going to be able to photograph those structures, but in general, the face and the body and the color pattern of the body are things that can help.
Great. And that bug guide is an online resource, it sounds like?
Yeah, it's an online website, but so if you're like looking on just a Google written description, look for the bug guide result that will come up.
Great.
So your comment about Seek and iNaturalist reminded me of something, a comment. And I think Seek and iNaturalist are part of the same company.
Yes.
And So the people here who are like the real like uber plant nerds really like iNaturalist, and they like it because you can report what you've seen. And there's some debate about like how accurate that is or whatever, but they really like iNaturalist. And the students hate iNaturalist. And one important thing I didn't point out was that when I give the students these apps, I give them the list of apps, I make them download them, I tell them which types of plants, I try to make sure they don't take pictures of the same plant, all that kind of stuff. I give them zero instruction on how to use the app. So I've actually had some of the app companies contact me and they're like, "Well, did you go through the directions?" And I'm like, "No, because the average person is not going to read your directions or watch your videos." I mean, like that's just the reality that we live in, right? So there's always, I think I put this in the article. I always say, if you actually read and follow their instructions, it probably tells you use a contrasting background or whatever. It probably will make the app work better. But I think the reason that they do not like iNaturalist is because it's not just a simple point and shoot and it gives you an answer. There's multiple steps required. It's not user friendly. And so if that's your first introduction to it, they do not like it. So I will use iNaturalist to report invasive species and different things. Not a lot, but a little bit. But yeah, I found that really interesting. And some of the people like at the herbarium here, they were like almost offended that iNaturalist did so poorly. And I'm like, well, I didn't give them, in fairness, and I try to say that too. I don't give them special instructions. We don't spend a class talking about each of these apps. I just say, here it is, use it. And
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's one of the things I do like about it is, you keep your lens open and you're moving your camera around and getting different angles. And it's showing you how well it's doing at matching and identifying what it is that's in the frame of your camera. So that's interesting that students don't like that.
yeah, at least, yeah, they haven't liked it for a while, but I think you can submit more than one photo to
Yeah,
iNaturalist, right? So
yeah,
I do think I don't. It wasn't clear if it was actually using both photos to spit back the ID, but I also don't know that for iNaturalist the real goal is. I think it's more of community oriented to create
in
these maps
collection.
and not just like an identification app, right? So I
Yeah.
think that there's that. But I do find it really interesting that once in a while, like, yeah, they'll apps companies will reach out and they'll say, "Hey, can you put ours in next year or whatever?" Um, Other thing I just found out, I was just picture this on our iPad from the lab to do like a demo at this conference we're having, and a picture of this has never contacted me, which is good. I probably don't want them to because they'll probably tell me to stop telling people how to use it for free. But they, it popped up with a little thing that said Michigan State University says this is the best app 6 years in a row, right? And so I'm like, oh, interesting. Like, I yeah.
They know.
So
They know about your research.
they do pay attention.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So someone in the chat had a question about, do you have any idea of how the data is used, like by the app companies? Are they using it for research on the back end?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. Because I don't know if they have any way of like going and validating that what it spit out was true. I think some of them will ask you like, is this what you had? Yes or no. And I think those are using it to validate, but I don't know if they're doing anything with your data or what they're doing with your data. Um, so that's a good question. The other thing I didn't touch on is I think more and more of them are starting to use GPS data, which would be helpful in them not suggesting a plant that doesn't grow in your region. But it's not always very transparent which apps are doing that or not. So I don't have the answer to that. I'm not the
Okay,
tech person, I'm just the weed person.
right, absolutely. I think that was the only question that was in the, but there was a lot of thank yous, a lot of real great appreciation for the topic and for both of your, and we might have some more coming in. I just wanted to mention too that like a lot of people like these apps because it gives you like what some people call a life list. that's usually for the plants we actually love, but also could be helpful to have a life list of the weeds that you've combated, right? So
Yeah,
you're
so I
trying to
think that
have
that
them
would be one caveat of using the free version. I know and picture this is that it will keep track of them, I think, for the day or for a limited amount of time. But because you're not paying the fee, it's not gonna keep a list for like a long period of time. At least that's not been my experience, that it's gonna do that. So if that's important to you, then that and you use it a lot, that might be something. Or you could try one of the other apps, just realizing that maybe it's not always as accurate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, if you have any other questions, please put them in the chat box. But yeah, I think the lessons are clear to have some good resources to validate what you're seeing, especially in the categories that Dr. Erin mentioned. And what were those again? Grasses,
Yeah, so
um,
I had flowering
like,
ornamentals, I had flowering broadleaf weeds, vegetative broadleaf weeds, flowering grass weeds, vegetative grass weeds. Then I had seedlings, and in the last couple years, I've started to grow seedlings so we could have amaranthus seedlings. They wouldn't be growing in the fall when we usually test. And then
mm,
we've added evergreen trees and shrubs and deciduous trees and shrubs to the list.
okay. Yeah, and those were the categories that it didn't do so well with those
Yeah,
apps.
which I was very surprised it didn't do better with the evergreens, but
Mhm. That is interesting. Well, thanks one more time for being here with us today. I think it's just really useful and yeah, it's useful to have this right in your pocket. So
yeah.
I've found it useful for myself a lot lately. Um, just as a general kind of announcement, this is our last presentation in the series. So today I will be sending out a kind of summary email to everyone who registered for any of our presentations. And I'll be including the recording links to all of the presentations. So if you missed one, you'll get a nice summary email today with all of the recording links available to you. Okay. And so thank you. Thanks so much for being with us. We love doing this every year and we hope to continue to do that. Um, so we hope to see you. One other thing to kind of announce is that we will be doing this year a set of presentations with farmers. So Zoom meetings with farmers that have created a virtual tour with us as the working group. And we're going to be doing basically like a virtual tour of their farm throughout each month throughout the rest of the year. So we don't have any details available just yet, but those will come out really soon. So please, if you're interested, um, we'll share them in the same vein that we shared these webinars. So you're likely going to get that information, in this upcoming month. So please take a look out for those so you can meet some farmers in the Great Lake region um, and actually take a look at their farm, even though you might not be able to travel there. So yeah, so thanks all. Thanks all. Let's see if there's any last questions.
I was actually typing the answer and I forgot I can unmute. So someone asked, is there a place in the insect apps to report invasive species in a location? I.e., for example, the spotted lanternfly. So if you're using iNaturalist or Seek, you can like record your observation and submit it to the app so that data point is there. But when it comes to something like an invasive species, you should check with your state invasive species. Like for us, it's the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, or whatever your invasive reporting tool is, because the app is not necessarily talking to that agency that's collecting invasive information.
Yeah, and I think there's the Glendon, the Great Lakes Early Detection Network, actually has its own app, but it also has a website. So that might, if you're looking for an app-based thing, that might be the tool. Again, it's called Great Lakes Early Detection Network. Make sure I got that right. Yeah. And that's something you can use. It is a little clunky, probably even more clunky than iNaturalist, because you do have to kind of find the category which you're trying to report. So, but then if if you find that that doesn't work for you, just reach out to your extension office, and they'll help you connect to who you need to talk to. And we would always rather people report stuff that they find, even if it has a small chance of being something actually invasive. So we'd rather have that than miss something and let it go unchecked. Okay, yeah. Dr. Erin put another one in there too. So great.
I think they do have an app too. I think I have it on my phone. Don't use it that often, but another option.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those real practical apps tend to not be as smooth as some of the maybe for-profit developed ones, but all right. Well, thanks so much. I think everyone probably had a chance to get their questions in, and yeah, thanks again for being here with us, and hopefully we'll see you soon at any of our other upcoming kind of webinar type events. All right. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye, Laura. Bye, Laura.